Hey everyone, Katie Kimball here for the Healthy Parenting Connector, where it is my pleasure and my passion to connect you, parents who really want to raise healthy kids, with the experts who have the information you need. Today, we're talking about the power of story. We're going to talk about some buzzwords like resilience and trauma, and why these really may be part of your family's needs, especially in this global pandemic we continue to find ourselves stuck in. I've got Marcy Pusey here with me, and she is a certified rehabilitation counselor and certified trauma and resilience practitioner. But she really has a heart for story, and I'm so excited to jump into this. Thank you so much, Marcy.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So Marcy and I got connected because we both spoke, or well, I was supposed to, she did speak at a TEDx event this year in 2020, and I saw her TEDx talk, her first one of two actually, about story, and I thought, my families need to hear this. I thought this is so fascinating and so good. And honestly, I don't even think I knew about this awesome like trauma and resilience piece in there. So I'm even more excited to talk to Marcy. But let me sort of introduce you, the official bio. Yeah. Like me, Marcy is the mother of 4. She's also the wife of an artist. And in her past many lives, she's tossed pizzas for a pizzeria, acted and sang in a musical, advocated for families with special needs, made appearances in a few movies, and rhymed with balloon animals. I love that so much. It's so much fun. Now, she's got all those awesome letters after her name, and we talk about counseling, trauma, and resilience. And she's an international speaker, writing, and publishing coach, and the best-selling author of books for adults and children, which is why we're going to talk so much about story today. And I love this. Marcy loves the smiles and giggles of kids who see themselves in her pages, and the tearful nods of adults who realize they're not alone when they read her words. So her TEDx talk that inspired this interview is called How Story Empowers Kids to Shape Our World. And I would love to hear a little bit of background. I mean, that was a lot of background, but how did story and trauma all sort of collide in your life and become a career?
Oh, that's a great question. Trauma, obviously, well, no. I was going to say trauma came first, but no, the storytelling did too. The TED Talk gives a little bit of context for how I learned that I was a writer, like just realizing that I processed my world through the pen. But I just didn't know that you could do anything with it, you know, career-wise, or even help other people do it. So it just kind of went to the wayside, and I grew up and I became a therapist, and I worked in social services and in group homes and foster agencies, and those were really great. But I think I was always a little bit lacking the thing that really gives me life, which was telling story. And what I later realized about myself as I studied trauma, because of my work in social services and with foster and adopt families, raising children, we raised foster kids and adopted 2 of those kids. I just found myself exposed to a lot of people who'd been through trauma, and thus brought trauma to us, because they continued to live out of it in our home as we raised them too. And along the way, I realized that my writing wasn't just to help people like I thought. It was really to wrestle with myself, to ask my own hard questions. And I found that the more I wrote, the more I really kind of dislodged my own traumatic experiences and was able to process them in a way that served me, but then also was serving the people around me as I shared it. So I think the combination of just me being wired that way, and then being exposed to people experiencing trauma, and then my own experiences with trauma, just collided in a way that gave me awareness, like, oh, this actually does something really powerful. I wonder if it does for everybody. And then I dug in, and it does.
Wow. Now, you look very young, so that I have to ask, how old are your kids?
Yeah. So my oldest kids are 21 and 20. Those 2 were adopted through foster care in California. And then my birth children are 13 and 11. And I had all 4 of them in 20 months, plus the other kids that we fostered.
Oh my gracious.
There's a lot of dye in my hair. I am young, but there's also a lot of dye just to cover up the impact of those 20 months.
Meaning that you birthed 2 children and received 2 foster children in the same 20-month span.
Yes, I
Holy
birthed
cow.
2 children, I adopted 2 children, and then we fostered like 5 or 6 others, also in the
Same
20 months.
time. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness. Oh my
for
goodness.
real.
But yeah, so I mean, you're definitely a mom with experience
Yeah.
too, having launched
Uh-huh.
2 children into
Yep.
adulthood and
Yep.
oh, having the teen and preteen.
Uh-huh.
Ooh, yep, you're gonna get a few more grays probably before the process is over.
For sure.
Now, so we often hear people say kids are resilient. And
Yeah.
I think now, I mean, we're recording this interview September of 2020, so school
Mhm.
has just begun in the most weird and awkward and
Yeah.
confusing way possible for just about every family in America, except those who are already homeschooling. God bless them. And I see a lot of articles that say, yeah, you know what? Kids are going to be fine. They're going to be fine. They're resilient. They're not going to be bothered by masks. They're not going to be bothered by plexiglass between them and their teachers. And I'm really curious, as a resilience expert, how true do you feel that is?
Yeah, this is a myth I'm trying to bust in some ways, because I think saying kids are resilient is a little bit of a cop out. And I don't mean that to judge anyone, but I think it just makes it really easy for us to not feel that they need our support and help
Mm,
through hard times. And to be honest, I think it's because we're trying to survive. Like,
mm,
we're trying to navigate what is a traumatic event. Like, a global pandemic falls under a traumatic event, right?
yeah.
Exposure to a threat to our core needs of safety. There's this invisible killer out there, and we are told that we're responsible for keeping everyone safe from this invisible killer that we might be carrying, and kids especially. And so therefore, any mistake you make could lead to the death of another person and the death of yourself. And so we adults, hearing that, having to navigate that, most of us for the first time, are also in a survival mode. And so it's really easy to say kids are resilient, they'll be okay, because we're just trying to survive. And I don't know if I have the capacity to help anyone else survive. Right? So I want to be clear about that, because I don't mean it judgmentally, but I do think it's a bit of a cop out, because that our capacity is maxed.
Mm,
So are kids resilient? Yeah, to a degree. I mean, they have to be. We all have to be. But the reality is, resilience is a combination of your life experience and the resources that you've gained over time by having those experiences, overcoming them or not overcoming them, and learning from it. It's from having a history with yourself, knowing that you can do hard things because you've had to do them before. But kids don't have life experience yet. They're so young. They don't have those resources to pull from, right? So are they resilient? On the outside, they look like it because they're triggered as well into survival mode. And so their brains are doing what it's designed to do, which is keeping them alive. And that can look a variety of ways. And to us, it can look like you're fine, when in reality, they're taking all of this brand new information in, internalizing it, and it's just getting stuck and
mm,
lodged in there, right? And if we don't have good supports around them, it's going to stay lodged, and we're going to have lots of really interesting behavior as a result that we don't even connect to this experience. So
yeah.
that's resilience, right? Like, no, we're all
Mhm.
dealing with that.
I wish I could remember the exact statistic, because a few weeks ago I read an article that stated that I think it was half to 2/3 of parents are reporting that their children's behavior has changed in
Yeah.
quarantine. And I think a lot of people are attributing that to just being home all day, right? Just like really basic level, like non-emotional changes in schedule,
Right.
as opposed to perhaps what you're saying is that, honestly, Marcy, when you sort of kind of said that diatribe about here's what a global pandemic is and what we all should be
Yeah.
afraid of, like my hair started standing on end and my heart started racing,
Yeah.
even though I don't completely feel that way. Just
Uh-huh.
hearing you talk about how
Yeah.
like that threat, that everyone's a threat, and I thought, oh my goodness, what are our children thinking if they overhear the news or they overhear
Oh, they
adults
totally do.
talking?
Mm-hmm.
And oh my
Yep.
gracious.
Yeah. And I have found that kids pick up on our anxiety too, right? So families that have been less, I don't want to say, less sensitive, or at least normalized it a little more, have had less anxiety around it. The kids pick that up. And so they continue to walk through it as well. Like, we're going to be okay. because my parents know we're going to be okay. We're going to do the things we need to do, but we're also going to be okay. And I think in homes where there's just been a lot more anxiety around it for the adults, the kids pick that up too, because they have no resources to pull from. They only have yours to borrow. And so how we are modeling this experience, which again, no judgment, because this is a first time for all of us and we're all triggered into survival mode, and that will look different for you. But that's where I hope this conversation too brings understanding to it, so you can recognize it in yourself, you can recognize it in them, and you can do something about it, right? Like when you catch yourself thinking, gosh, I'm so glad kids are so resilient because I'm a mess. Like, oh, but you know what? They actually have less experience than I have. How am I navigating this, and what can I model for them? And I think too, to throw this in, like we need to work on our language. Our kids did not go home to do online learning. They went home in a global crisis to try to learn online. But we call it online learning like it's homeschooling. It's not homeschooling. It is a global crisis where they are trying to learn online. Everything they've known in their short years of life has been pulled out from under them, which is their social awareness, their social expectations, the interactions. You know, when developmentally they're cued to be drawn to each other and learning from each other and mimicking each other and grow, like, and then they're separated. We feel that as adults, but how much more so for kids when developmentally, this is how they're growing. This is what triggers further development in them. And now they're separated. And our languages, well, they're just they're, online learning. No, they're totally not. And we aren't either, right? Teachers are not working from home. Teachers are at home in a global crisis trying to teach online. Like, we have to be really truthful when we have this language, because it's impactful. It diminishes the reality of what we're experiencing. And so then we don't take it as seriously for ourselves, for those around us.
Wow. Language is so powerful. And again, just thank you for those perspectives. I know every time I've had to email a principal or a teacher, I say, I'm so sorry, you guys, and for your jobs, because you are having to reinvent a system that has worked for over 100 years in a few weeks. Like, that's insane. That is superhuman ability. And I know, I'm a teacher by trade. And when you're trained to be a teacher, they talk about this first 6 weeks of school and how vital it is not to teach anything academic. That happens. Right. It's so vital to set the habits, the routines, and the classroom community. And my heart breaks for these teachers who are, like, as you said, trying to reinvent teaching and learning through screens, which is just not the same. And I have to dial back to repeat something you said too that I thought was so powerful. You said the only resources kids have are what they borrow from us, I believe. Oh yeah. No wonder we feel like such a mess sometimes if my resources are being borrowed upon and I didn't feel like I had a lot going on in the first place. So storytelling can help here, I believe. So what can storytelling do for a child's brain, and why do we want to be storytellers, help our kids be storytellers?
Yeah, this is so exciting to me. I love it. And I just think the potential is so incredible. So storytelling for any human brain actually lights up the brain. Unlike any other kind of like information however we receive other information, like a textbook lights up one part of our brain, a very small part. That's why we have to read textbooks over and over. It just doesn't integrate or stay. But story actually cues our brain to curiosity, and it releases dopamine because it wants your brain to follow that curiosity, because probably in a story there's a lesson to be learned that you can apply. So it actually gives kids an opportunity to gain life experience safely wherever they are, because it also activates as though they're living the experience. That's all of us. When we hear story, when you're watching a movie, when you're watching a musical, reading a book, your brain is lighting up as though you are the one there having this experience. So when we've got kids who have so little life experience of their own to pull from, and we give them an opportunity to have good story, right? Story that resonates with them, that actually builds them up and shows them what is possible, what they can do. They get to have that life experience without actually having to go out and do anything dangerous or risky to get it, right? Like, it's in our lap or in the classroom setting. So it's so incredible. And when we know that, we can be such good stewards of story for each of us, but also for their brain, because now we know, hey, you don't actually have to live 20 more years before you can figure out how to deal with a global pandemic. we can be sharing story now and giving you opportunity to experience hard things without actually having to experience the hard thing.
That is fascinating,
Mm-hmm.
powerful. That's life-changing. And
It is, totally is.
yeah, when we think about, we're talking to parents here, but teachers
Yeah.
as well.
Yep.
Just last night I was talking to a friend who her church elders are trying to kind of get rid of their library just to create more space, right? They don't feel it's important. And she said, particularly, they seem to think that fiction has no purpose. And I was like, man, I watch my kids read historical fiction and they know far more about the Revolutionary War or the Great Depression than ever any textbooks. And that was all I could think of when you talked about the brain lighting up,
Yep.
is how much. And so it's because we like embody the story. It's why we cry at movies, I guess, because of what our brain is doing. Okay, so crying at movies is not being weak. It's just following your brain.
It's exactly right.
Good to know. I might be one of those criers.
And this is why too, it's good for us. And I know a lot of families do, like, filter the kinds of stories our kids have access to, because it is interacting with their brain as though they are experiencing it. And so that's where I say, like, what's that supportive story? Where's the story that shows a kid overcoming hard things? As an author for children, that's something I'm always building into my story. It's not an adult coming in to rescue the kid, to give the lecture, to provide the lesson, because that is life. That is everyday life in a child. What they need to see is a kid experiencing a challenge, coming to their own conclusion, overcoming their own obstacle, failing or not, but learning from whatever happens and going, oh, kids can do that. Kids can learn on their own and be critical thinkers and come up with their own solutions. And the more they get to experience that in story that's been supportive, right, that has that kind of intentionality behind it, the more they develop that confidence for themselves that they can go out into the world and do the same thing.
Wow. So this is very important for parents. We're talking about filtering the stories coming at our kids, making sure they're positive, building them up. Showing them how to get through hard things. And I mean, equally, kind of the reverse negative of that is, let's make sure we're not watching stories where maybe the kid is the bad guy, or you're, some stories or movies, like, you're rooting for the bad guy. And I've always felt that that's very dangerous for our brains. I'm glad that you sort of underscored that that's true. It is dangerous for our brains. The good guys need to be the good guys. Bad guys need to be the bad guys. And we want our kids rooting against the bad guys and learning from the good guys. Now that's the stories coming in. What about the stories coming out? Why do we want kids telling their own stories?
It's so good. Okay, so I want to explain that. I want to talk just a little bit about, like, what is trauma and what are traumatic events, right? So the traumatic events are, like, we've all experienced them, especially now that we've been through a global pandemic. It's either an ongoing event that presents a threat to our core sense of safety, or it's a one-time event. So we've got, of course, exposure to war or national disasters, fires right now tearing through parts of the country. Those are all traumatic events that people are experiencing. When it becomes trauma is when that traumatic event is experienced as a threat to the life, like, my life is threatened and I'm powerless to do anything about it. It's really the freeze state of the fight, flight, or freeze. And there's now, like, other that keeps growing, but those are the three we're most familiar with. So I'm going to stick there for now. So it's really that freeze state of, like, my life is in danger. And it might even be emotional. It might be my sense of self is in danger. And that can be just as damaging as your actual physical life, right? And I'm powerless to do anything about it. When that happens, the memory of that event, the experience of that event, moves into our amygdala, which is a great part of our brain, but it's not the part that knows how to categorize information or set it into files in the brain that say, this happened in the past and here's what we took from it. It's a part of our brain that stays very, very present. So what that means is it always feels like the threat is still right now. So when you think of, like, PTSD, individuals dealing with PTSD or complex PTSD or just various, disorders that come from trauma, they're always sort of reacting to the world around them as though their life is still in danger, because there's this unprocessed trauma still stuck in the brain. Now, one of the problems, unfortunately, with years and years of psychology is that we've tried to treat that with talk therapy. Talk, right? Okay. But that's not where that trauma is being held. It's actually being held in our inner brain, which is not cognitive. So when we talk at it, it doesn't get in at all. And I think there's a lot of evidence and support. Like people can probably draw up memories of, yeah, years and years of therapy where I talked about this thing and I just kept talking about it like nothing happened. So what we're seeing is that to dislodge that trauma, two things really need to be in place. One, an opportunity to re-experience the event, but in a safe place, in a safe way. You want to give your body the physical experience of, I'm safe, I'm not actually in danger, and allow the memory or the feelings of that event to come back, right? So there's that. and then the opportunity to express that in some way. And so because it's an inner brain stuckness, that's what we have to tap into. And the way to do that is through expressive and creative arts, opportunities for people, not even just children, to do free expression. So it's not cognitive, right? Maybe it's playing with clay and I'm just playing. I'm not thinking about it. I'm not planning to build a house. No one told me to build a house. I'm just creating. Okay. You're actually doing an inner brain process that you don't even have to understand. It can be drawing, it can be writing, it can be beating drums, it can be movement of your body. So like free dance or free movement, anything where you're just expressing yourself without the cognition or someone telling you what to do, taps into that inner brain and begins to wrestle with and dislodge what's stuck in there. And what I love about this is we don't even have to understand it. You don't need a play therapist to be there going, oh, this is what that means. Oh yeah, tell me about that. You don't. I mean, as a parent, if you provide opportunities for any kind of expression, right? Not every kid's going to want to draw it out or beat it out. Like, so figuring out what works for your kid, but providing the opportunities, normalizing them, which might mean you're practicing them yourself, and creating that space. If you just bring your curiosity, oh, tell me about that. What did you make in the clay there? Don't say, hey, is that a house? Like that's not bringing your curiosity. That's bringing your interpretation, but just, hey, tell me about it. Sometimes words will come out. Sometimes they'll just say, I don't know, I'm just playing. It doesn't change anything. Their brain is working it out just with the action of it. So back to your question, like storytelling, what does it mean for them to be storytellers? Yeah. Well, they're accessing that inner part of themselves. You know, if they're not being told to write about this or that, and they're just pouring out story, that is them doing some kind of wrestling with something inside of them. And okay, does that mean you should be concerned if there's zombies? Like my son recently wrote a story with lots of zombies and the whole town had been killed and he was like one of the survivors. Like, should you be concerned? No, because there's other messages. Okay, I shouldn't say no. Like as a mom or dad, go with your gut. If there's something in your gut, go with it. But generally, it's not even necessarily the content of the story. It's the questions being asked through the storytelling. Am I valuable if? Am I seen? Can you make mistakes and still be loved? Do I matter? Am I enough? What if I'm not? Right? Like, so these come out in interesting ways. And again, you don't even have to understand it or interpret it. Just them telling story is activating that inner brain where things are stuck and they're doing the important work of wrestling.
Okay. And for a while I was thinking that kids needed to tell their stories of traumatic experiences, traumatic events, but you're saying just make sure kids are telling stories, even fiction.
Yes.
It up. And you're not like starting a little storytelling session by saying, well, let's relive this trauma and right. Correct. Like you're not even connecting it to any traumatic event or experience. It's just that's kind of like, I don't know, like you exfoliate your skin once a week.
Yes.
This is sort of like a purge for the brain that should be done regularly.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And that's a great point. It doesn't have to be about the trauma. And, you know, if you've ever been in a fight or flight situation, or a freeze situation, you might recognize that like, your memory wasn't engaged right then. So you might go back and go, man, that whole space of time was really fuzzy. Or I don't even know like what I feel about that. I feel pretty numb. Or memories just aren't there at all. So there are some traumatic events that become trauma that are hidden. Like your survival skill is to not remember it, right? They're suppressed, or to not even be able to touch it. It's so painful. And so the process of just beginning in the ways that they can is what leads to that healing. You know, our hope is that eventually that will open up, like you said, those purges will eventually open up an opportunity to have a conversation about the trauma if that's necessary. Like they might work themselves through it their brain might catalog everything and they never need to talk about it again. They did the work.
Wow.
But we're not forcing that. We're just creating opportunities for kids to do this expressive art. And we're talking about story. And that doesn't have to be pen and paper, right? Like we can get locked in like, hey kid, time to sit down and write a story.
Yeah.
No, maybe they want to tell it through acting. Maybe, you know, how many kids are like, mom and dad, sit down, I'm going to do a show for you. Yeah, that might be it. It might be how they want to express it. It might be the clay. I'm going to just create things and act them out and do a little play thing here. Like it doesn't, we can back up from how it should look and just provide resources for it to happen. And then again, bringing our curiosity to that. So, hey, tell me more about that. Oh, I'd love to know what brought this idea up. Hey, why is that green? Does that have meaning to you? Like just bringing our curiosity and creating spaces and permission for them to talk about it if they want, to process it if they want, but knowing that regardless of what we understand of it, they're doing good work for their brain.
Yeah. Wow. It's also fascinating. So in some ways we can kind of, I think, put this idea of storytelling, at least in my brain, in a folder called creativity, right?
Yeah.
Which being sure to make opportunities for your kids to be creative, which I love. I talk about that all the time with our kids' cooking classes because especially now we are on these screens so much and we're not working with our hands very often. And I know that it's just so valuable for kids to be creative, both in like the physical, I'm creating something with my hands, but also like maybe I'm tweaking a recipe or making something up, or being an agent of, my own activity here. Creative. So that's, it's good. It's good validation to know that, yes, like this is so very important. And then the word curiosity too, I just want to repeat that for parents. Like it is far too easy for us to come in and just state our opinion, or like you said, assert our interpretation. But to ask those questions and to be a little curious and to sit down with our kids, very, very important. Now, I know that my kids were in a car accident with me, no big deal. We weren't really hurt. I have friends who have been in car accidents with kids, and I've always kind of told them like, make sure you do talk about it with your kids afterward and let them draw about it if they're little, so that it's not just this whole kind of erased thing that nobody wants to talk about because it's scary. Is there anything in particular, if there's a real, single event like a car accident, that you would tell parents, make sure you do this? Or is it just that everyone needs to tell stories all the time?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Yes to all of it. Good. I think there's space to asking questions, like checking in. Again, bringing your curiosity, like, hey, what have you been processing about that? Or I don't know, what else would you ask? I mean, I would probably just get out paper and say, let's draw. And I wouldn't even necessarily talk about the car accident on the front end. But even as we're drawing, I might be able to ask some questions, I think another piece of trauma that's important is, 5 people can be in the same traumatic event and 4 of them can experience it as not a big deal. And 1, it becomes trauma that follows them through life. And it's really because of the perception that we bring to the event to a degree, right? There's some events that are so bad that hardly anyone's going to walk away without having trauma. So I'm not saying let's judge the person who's been traumatized because of their perception that they brought, but an awareness that if the child in the car said to themselves, they assigned a meaning to the event that said, wow, my parents can't keep me safe. And I can't keep me safe. So now I live in a world where I am always at risk and no one is trustworthy to keep me safe. Like if that's the meaning they brought to that event, that's going to stick with them in a far different way than a kid who goes, wow, I'm so glad mom and dad swerved when they did. And even though we got hit, like we're alive, they kept me safe. And I now know that I can get in a car accident and live. So I'm actually less afraid of car accidents because I've done one already, right? Like depending on the meaning they bring to it, will determine how we walk away from it. And so I think that's, again, like bringing your curiosity. It'd be real easy to say, well, you were in a car accident, this must have been traumatizing, or you were in it, it must not be a big deal because it was just a fender bender. But I would really check in with some of those kinds of things, trying to get to some of the meaning they might have taken away from it, and paying attention to behavior. Right? Because for the kid who feels like now I'm not safe in the world, you're probably going to see like more separation anxiety. You're probably going to see like, no, I don't want to leave the house really anymore. I don't want to go play with my friends. Like if they're kind of triggered in a sense of the world isn't safe and I can't keep myself alive and they can't keep me alive, like you're going to see their wiring protect them from putting themselves at risk. And so again, that's just some intentional awareness around it, but then bringing the curiosity and the opportunities. So I think I would still try to enter through some kind of expressive art, and then create a safe space for words, but not press them and not interpret anything, but just check in. Hey, how was that for you? You know, for me, gosh, that car accident, it surprised me and it kind of scared me. And maybe you talk about yourself, right? I feel a little bit like, man, if I get in the car again, am I going to be in another car accident? Has that been anything that you've thought about, or what are some things you've thought about after that? Right? Like, again, not trying to just ask, do you feel traumatized?
Right.
Do you ever want to get hard? This must have been hard, but just kind of maybe even sharing. Some people might have, some kids might have. How about you? Tell me about your experience, and giving them that opportunity. And again, if they're not ready for words, like, great, here's some paper, let's color together. And just let them begin to work it out.
Yeah, I mean, that's so practical and helpful, I think, for parents about all sorts of events, right?
Yeah.
Even just falling off a bike, right?
Yeah.
Falling off a bike could be similarly traumatizing. So I want to kind of, now I'm gonna test myself. Okay, quick quiz, Katie. Do you remember what trauma was? Because your definition was just so helpful for me. Your life, physical or emotional, is in danger, and you feel powerless.
Yeah.
Right. You feel like you couldn't fix the problem, or you couldn't help yourself. And so I think a lot of us, I know whenever I see trauma type titles in, podcasts or whatever, I think, like, I don't have to listen to that one because I had a pretty chill life. I probably don't have any trauma. But I think what you're saying is, like, probably people shouldn't dismiss the fact that their life probably doesn't have trauma, because maybe we do, and we're just not realizing that a small event, it doesn't have to be a war or big event. It can be something that was just one day that you don't even realize is there. And I like too, it sounds like what you're saying too is, if parents are talking with kids, that's good. But if you sort of open the door to the amygdala by doing something expressive before and during the talking, it supercharges that process and makes the talk much more worthwhile. Am I understanding that right?
Absolutely. And I guess I would say too, go with your gut. You know your kids, and you have that sixth sense about how they're doing. I think we do. There are expressive art therapists. So if you ever felt like, this does just feel bigger than me, and I don't know if coloring is enough for this, like, check in with one of them. And I would say, to the chagrin of my colleagues, like, avoid talk therapy unless they're really wanting to verbally process it and you see that happening. Like, great. If they're in a verbal processing state, like, go with it. But otherwise, there are special therapists who do expressive arts, or who do trauma informed therapies with children that will be so much more effective in helping them process through it than just like, I don't know, let's go to a talk therapist and let them play. So just as a thought there, like, know when it's bigger than you, and go get the help. It's okay. Yes.
Yeah. Very important caveat there. So now let's get real practical, and what are ways that parents, can continue to help kids tell their own stories? And I think you have a little free gift for people.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yep. So I have a free gift for your listeners that is exactly that. It's a PDF that will help parents help kids tell their story, and give you some actual tips and action steps for getting that started. And again, some reminders in there too about why it's important and what you're doing when you step into that. And so there's some really great tools that I like. There's a little bag of cubes you can buy called story cubes, and each side of, they're kind of like dice, but on each side of them is an image. And so one thing that we'll do sometimes is take that out, usually in an airport, like, when we're like, what can we do that's gonna pass the time? And you toss them down, and then all of the images that are upwards, like, the game is to try to come up with a story that uses all of the elements of the cubes. So that's a little guided, but there's so much creativity about how they want to form that story. That's something you could do. I know I've mentioned clay a few times, Play-Doh, but even just pulling out the stuff, and you might feel like they're too big, but no kid is too big. Like, my 8th grader the other day was like playing with it in an office. There's something really kinesthetic that feels good and kind of grounds you when you've got something in your hands and you're able to manipulate it. And so even just you modeling it, like, they come home and you're sitting at the table playing with Play-Doh, probably someone's going to jump in, no matter their age. And you can either start a story with that, like, hey, tell me more about what you made, what's going on, ask questions, or just let the creation happen. And then there's actual just prompts like, hey, do you guys want to sit down and tell a story? I'll start the one sentence, you say the next sentence, you say the next one, right? Games where you go around the room and everyone has to fill in just normalizing the act of it as well will feed into some of those other times where maybe they do just want to pull out a journal and write down their thoughts, and encourage that they can have a journal and a safe place to process words on paper if that's what they need to do. So I know I just dropped like 3 or 4 kind of random things, but that PDF is full of other great ideas. And so I'm happy to give that to you guys.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yep. And we will link to that wherever we share this interview. Super helpful. My brain is already turning on I have very, very, very various ages, high school, middle school, upper elementary, and kindergarten. So they have such different needs as far as, my 2 little boys, they just hate picking up a pencil and writing. They just hate it so much. So obviously that's not going to be the medium that I choose for good, positive storytelling.
Right.
But even whenever we call my grandma, who's 94, I always say, okay, everybody think of a story to tell Gigi. And so even that is a really practical way to just be telling, obviously those aren't fictional, but just make sure we're telling some sort of story and building that habit. So
you can do that with pictures, right? You could pull out, how many of us print them anymore? But if you've got some printed, or pull them out on your phone, hey, remember this picture? What do you remember about that day? What was your favorite thing about that day? What was hard about that day? You can use anything around you really, and bringing your curiosity is the main thing. Creating those safe spaces and then just letting them do it or not do it. And if they don't want to, great. Try it a different time, a different day. Try it when you're in the kitchen cooking. That side-by-side interaction, I was going to get there in a little bit, but that side-by-side interaction is often more effective for kids and relationship building than the face-to-face. If you're like me, you want to look them in the eyes and be like, let's talk. And they're like, this feels not comfortable, right? I think it was James Dobson who said some of the best conversations happen in cars where everyone's looking forward, right? Or at a restaurant if you're side by side. And so I think even in the kitchen when you're cooking, you're doing something else. So that is the focus, but now there's this space to talk and to create. And it both, I think, supports the relationship that's happening there, but also normalizes, once again, right, the expression of self through whatever activity we're doing. And you talked about that earlier, what if we're following a recipe, but also what if we can tweak it? Or what if we're just going to make something up today? Pull out our ingredients. What do we have? What do you want to make? That's my daughter. She's just can I just go through she's 11, right? Can I just go through our kitchen and make something? And part of me, inside is no. Right. I don't know what it's going to be. And I don't know. But then the other part of me that, the one who's a little more mature is absolutely. I don't care about the mess. You'll clean it up and I won't taste it if I don't want to, but go for it. And I just think there's room there, even in the kitchen, right? Maybe especially in the kitchen, for that to happen for the kid who's not going to take the pen and paper, but would love to take the pizza dough and whatever else is in the fridge and create the strangest calzone you've ever seen. But there's something happening. There's an expression of who they are happening as they create, no matter what it is. And so it's always doing something.
Awesome. Well, you've definitely added something new to my story that I can now, really explain to people intelligently why cooking unlocks stories and why it's so powerful for connection among families. I love that. Just kind of underscoring that. My goodness, this has been incredibly helpful. I think incredibly timely. Parents need this, Marcy. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, everyone. I'm Katie Kimball for the Healthy Parenting Connector, and I will see you again next week for another episode.